Cassandra. So good to have you. So good to connect. Last time and the first time I met you, we were in Northern California. I don't even remember where we were, up in the hills. And we were on a retreat together. And I was really taken by you and what you had to share about transformation and imagination. And so I'm hoping we can talk about those two topics today. But you opened with this word that I'd never heard before, the noetic experience. And I kind of felt like I was having a noetic experience with you. And then you had us share our noetic experiences with our partners. So can we just start with transformation and what it is and what a noetic experience is? And then we can see where that evolves to.
Sure. Well, it's just great to be here, Diana. I love your work, and I'm so glad that we're able to do this together. I have spent most of my career studying transformation in one way or another, and it was almost all driven by a couple of experiences I had in my teenage life, where about the time I was reaching puberty, I guess, my parents had just divorced, and between that and I think genetic and biological predispositions, I was having some really, really big emotions and levels of emotions and concerns and worries and even despair and existential crisis that age of brain and body can't really handle. It was sort of like being able to see a lot of things clearly, but not knowing how to process it. And I had a very profound experience when I was 17 that changed my life. And it seemed to happen in the course of about 30 minutes or an hour. I was having a really, really hard emotional time. And I had a moment of clarity. And I felt like I got a message from somewhere that said, here are the pathways that are laid out in front of you. Which one do you want to choose? Because you have a choice right now. And the decision you make is going to dictate how the rest of your life unfolds. Maybe it was God, maybe it was something from the universe. I don't know what word is right for it. And so it sent me on this path of, number one, being very interested in the relationship between deep, profound, transformative spiritual experiences, and then later mental health improvement and behavior improvement, and also mindfulness, because at that time, I was like, okay, if I'm not going to cope in all these other array of ways, what am I going to do? When I was a freshman in college, I took a class in Buddhism, and I just remember that room and sitting in it and going, this is the first true thing I have heard in my life. Like, this is correct. And it launched me on a path of mindfulness, meditation, and eventually expanding into other transformative practices, Qigong and yoga, Tai Chi. And then my research career became completely dedicated to looking at these kinds of practices and experiences and how they change people's lives.
Have you ever read that book, Why Buddhism is True? The Robert
No, but
Wright book.
I
Oh,
can relate to it.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's this title that is a little bit like, really, can you title it that way? But it's
Right.
true. And he uses actually a ton of science. It's similar to what you do in terms of going out there on a limb into these unexplored spaces. Well, unexplored in science spaces, very explored in other places, spaces, but going out there on a limb in the science world to say, hey, there is stuff out here that science hasn't looked at. And I'm curious, I'm fascinated, I'm yearning to know more. And that's what shows up in all of your work, which is what makes you so fun, is you bridge these worlds in such a cool way. So you were the CEO of the Noetic Studies,
Institute.
IONS, which I had never heard of. And you started sharing about that. And I was like, okay, tell us about IONS and the Institute of Noetic Studies, which kind of relates to your awakening as a teen.
Yeah, I mean, I ended up going to graduate school at the California Institute of Integral Studies, which is a private graduate school that brings together Eastern philosophy and Western psychology and even indigenous wisdom. So I was studying Buddhism and Hinduism and Sanskrit at the same time I was studying Western psychology. And psychoanalytic thinking and CBT. And so that was bliss for me. It was like, I can't believe I can do these trainings at the same time. And it really made sense to me. It wasn't super scientifically strong at the time, so I decided I wanted more research training. I went to UC San Francisco and spent 12 years there on my pre-doc, dissertation, and postdoc training in behavioral genetics. So I got a really strong grounding in hard science. And for those folks, psychology was super far out, much less
Mm.
spirituality. I mean, it was very biological and very mechanistic, and I learned a lot about it and how science works and the beauty of science, like the elegant beauty of science. And then I had a chance to bring those two together because I thought I don't really want to spend my career split into two pieces. And I put science and spirituality into my internet browser and found the Institute of Noetic Sciences that was about 10 minutes from my house. I'd never heard of it either. I drove over and talked to the lead scientist there and started working there 1 day a week and then 2 days a week. And before long, I was there full time, and I was there for 18 years, the last 6.5 as its president and CEO. So this institute had been founded by Edgar Mitchell, the Apollo 14 astronaut who was the sixth person to walk on the moon. And on his way back to the Earth from his moonwalk, he was in the space capsule. He had been awake for 36 hours. The space capsule's spinning. He's seeing the Earth and the sun and the stars and the moon every 10 minutes rotating. And he had what he would call an epiphany, what he later came to realize was very similar to what in Hinduism was called a samadhi experience, or feeling one with everything, feeling a unitive consciousness. And the way he put it was, I realized the molecules of my body were exactly the same as the molecules of the space capsule, of the stars, of the moon, of the sun, that we have all been, everything that exists has been created in star systems. And there is no separation when at a certain level. And then when he saw the Earth from space, he also saw there are no boundaries between countries. When you look at the Earth from space, we've created those,
Really? There's no little red
right?
lines?
No, no
And
little lines.
it's
Yeah.
not all with North America on top and South
Right.
America on
Exactly.
bottom.
Right.
Really?
Yeah. And
Huh.
so he was like, wow, if we keep going the direction we're going, we're going to destroy each other and the planet. And
Yeah.
we have to do a shift in our consciousness. We have to start seeing our interconnection around the planet, that there really are no others. And when you view the Earth from space, it's so tiny in a vast sea of blackness, hundreds of light years of no other life that we know of, that it's really silly to think that people on the other side of the planet are somehow different than us, or that we can engage in behaviors that harm others while benefiting ourselves. The idea that that doesn't harm all of us is crazy. So he came back and said, I'm going to start an Apollo program for inner space and find out, how do we shift consciousness? How do people have transformative experiences that change their worldview? And of course, that was my jam. So I was like, I am staying here. This is great. And it was amazing to work there.
You presented this spiral diagram, and we're both fans of the spiral. It's not this straight linear path. And many people have those noetic experiences. Maybe they don't go to outer space, but they have that moment, a loved one gets sick, or they go through a divorce, or they lose their job, or they hike Mount Kilimanjaro, whatever it is. And you have that moment where you see how small you are and how big everything is. And it doesn't always stick. So, what I liked about your model that you presented to us was sort of the off ramps from this type of noetic
Mm.
experience, and then how to stay on the on ramp of it,
Yeah.
how to actually make it transformative. And there's a science to this. You studied this, you like did some rigorous scientific study around it. Thank goodness for your training at UCSF before you went to,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
yeah.
and continue to try to unlock that using science. And so the noetic is a Greek word that means the inner form of knowing. So we know that there's a outer objective scientific form of knowing, the way you can measure something, or you can observe, or you can feel the chair underneath you or the table in front of you. But there's also an inner form of knowing, the way you know you love your children, or the way you know that when you walk into a place, something doesn't feel right, gut feelings or hunches or intuitions. or at an extreme level, even things like precognition or clairvoyance or remote viewing or things that people think are way off. But most people have had at least one experience in their lifetime of something like that, or an experience of interconnection or oneness or dissolution of the boundaries of the self and feeling that different layer of reality for a little while. So when someone has a noetic experience, William James, who we call the grandfather of psychology, described these two as these very authoritative moments of insight. And as you said, most people have them when they're in some period of disorientation or disruption or even destruction, a near-death experience, a fatal illness, a loss of a loved one, a divorce, a loss of a job, you know, an addiction hitting bottom. These things can drive someone to almost be forced to crack open or to shatter their current view of reality. And they may realize in that moment, I have been prioritizing the wrong things. I have been focused on things that don't matter. And I need to refocus myself on the things that really do matter. I need to orient my life around love, around meaning, purpose, joy, service, doing good things for myself and other people. And then some people have that noetic experience, the lucky ones, because they have a giant experience of awe and wonder and, the birth of a child or having a marriage or like being on top of a mountain and having a gigantic view or a religious or spiritual transformative experience. Some people have this in psychedelics or in other altered states of consciousness or through spiritual practice. And they also don't need to be big. They can be small. They can be like, you know what I'm going to do? I am going to spend 30 minutes every morning in my garden. And that 30 minutes in the morning in your garden can change your entire life and the lives of the people that you come into contact with. So it doesn't need to be dramatic, but it can be. Other people are like, I have been profiting off of other people my whole life, and now I'm going to create a fund for, micro lending in developing countries. And that's what I'm going to do with the rest of my life. And they change the lives of millions. The scale doesn't matter as much as the transformation or the shift. And as you said, some people have those experiences and then the next day they're like, well, I don't know what that was. Anyway, back to normal, and of course we're always going to be wanting to go back into homeostasis. But people who have these experiences, they're so profound at times that then it will move them into a period of seeking. What is this? What do I need to do? Who else has had this experience? Who knows how I can center my life around love? Does anybody even have a language for this? And often they'll find a community or a practice or a set of teachings that do resonate with what they've been feeling, kind of like that. Oh my gosh, Buddhism, it's so true that, they'll find something that's like, yeah, that can hold how I see the world now. And then they find a practice that they can engage in on a daily basis and begin to integrate that insight. Some people who have described these experiences say the experience wasn't the big deal. It was spending the rest of my life living into that insight, actually living that truth that I was shown in that insight. So they may find a practice, they may find a community, they move ahead and they continue to integrate that practice into their everyday lives. And then most people will find a time when it becomes not just about them, it becomes about all of us. We call it the I to we. Some people stay in the first place and they're just new and improved and they're okay with their life and they don't really make it about other people. But sometimes people like that will find something's missing and they'll take that next leap into, I have to start teaching. I have to start a podcast. I have to write a book. I have to bring this to my local PTA. I need to find a way to integrate it into my classroom or into my workplace. Again, it can be in a very, very small way, but nothing's really small. It makes a huge difference. Let's just say taking a moment of silence at the beginning of each business meeting so that everyone can arrive and connect with each other as people before you move into that meeting can change everything. A surgeon deciding every surgery I do, I'm going to stop with my team and take 60 seconds of silence where we reflect on why we're doing this, what we're really here for, and then they start. That changes lives. And so taking that movement from I to we and bringing it into the community, whether it's your local community or the larger community, is a big, big step toward collective transformation. And that's where people really find the deepest meaning and purpose and joy that they had been seeking their whole lives.
Right, because it goes back to that Apollo 14 experience where there's no lines around countries and there's no lines around us either. And when we have that noetic experience, then we often do see the bigger picture of how we're interconnected. Um, it made me think about when you were talking, I've had plenty of negative ones, plenty of those I could share, but it made me think about this experience of when I went to, my mom grew up in Peru, and she took me for her 70th and my 40th. We went to Peru and we went back to where she grew up. And we went to this space where we were going to walk into the Sacred Valley, and the tour bus dropped us off at the top of these salt mines, these pink salt mines in Peru. They like lay the pink salt out in the sun to dry it, and then they use this delicious Peruvian salt in lots of things. And we were on this retreat where the retreat leader requested that we all walk in silence down the Sacred Valley into where we were staying at the retreat center. It was a few miles walk. And it was a noetic experience of walking. I felt like I was walking with my mom, but I was walking like her life. Like I had this like transformative, seeing her in a different way. I felt like I knew the land, like I understood it. I understood the people. I felt like I was home in some way, and I'd never been there before ever. And it transformed my relationship with my mom thereafter. So I feel like we can have the transformative experience that they can transform how we are in the world, and we can all become better people and contribute in different ways. But it also can shift the way that we view others. Sometimes it can shift a marriage. If you have a noetic experience, it can shift I've seen clients where they have noetic experiences that shift their estranged relationships with loved ones. And it really is a dissolving of lines and almost, as you said, the word clairvoyance, seeing things that you didn't see before that were always there, and maybe a remembering of something that has always been there.
Yeah, people will say that they have not so much a sense of something new, but something that they deeply recognize, that they really they see it and they go, oh, that's right. It's almost like you said, they're remembering something.
So you researched people that have had noetic experience, and you did a narrative analysis. And then you also were researching shamans, rabbis, spiritual teachers. Tell us more about just the science behind it.
Often the way that science progresses is scientists will recognize a phenomenon or something anomalous, meaning that it's not usual. And they'll say, what happened there? Like, can people really change in like one day? That shouldn't be happening. That's not part of what we know about how people change.
It's not tiny
And
habits.
right, exactly.
Yeah.
And so you use what we can call in science a natural history approach, where first you interview tons and tons and tons of people who have had it happen. And that's when you start to give shape to the experience. You start to map the experience and see, like, what are the contours of what happened to people? What was similar among people and what was different across people? And this happens in medicine. You know, for example, when we first started to learn that radiation can cause cancer, it was, you know, all these kids getting cancer and nobody understanding what was happening. And it was actually a nurse who said, I'm going to interview every single family where these kids got this type of cancer and figure out what it was in common that they did. And they realized they had all been x-rayed without lead coverings. And she said, okay, I've discovered that x-rays cause this. And the medical community was like, you're crazy, you're hysterical, you're a woman, be quiet. It took a long time for her to finally convince people that that's what was happening. So that's just one of many, many examples. When we see something happen, an extraordinary healing, we might go into it and interview all the people who had it. So that's what we did first. Then we talked to teachers of various transformative processes, whether it was religious or an indigenous process or Eastern, Western, eclectic, modern. So it included yoga, Tai Chi, Qigong, Catholicism, Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, all these different people who had learned a lot about that tradition. And they'd also taught hundreds or thousands of students and seen the process unfold in front of them. So we took all of their interviews and kind of panned for gold, I would call it, trying to find the commonalities among all of those, and then also looking for some of the differences, because I believe each one of these traditions has something to offer to the full picture. And so then we created the model of how people seem to change irrespective of what tradition they're coming from. And we did use a spiral because prior it was myself, Tina Amarak, and Marilyn Schlitz who worked mostly on this project with a big team of interns who worked with us for 2 years doing this very laborious taxonomic process of sorting out the words people used, encoding every single sentence they said. And so we felt like the process of transformation has always been kind of masculine in the sense that it's been like stages, and you're going to go up a ladder, and every time you go up the ladder you're going to incorporate all the previous stages, and you just keep rising up.
And then
And
you
it's
get to the
like,
top and you look down on everyone because I've been
right,
transformed.
yeah, you become like this, what do they call it, like this, violet consciousness or something that's
Yeah,
above everything
exactly.
else. And it we just don't believe it's hierarchical like that. And if anybody's on this call has been through a transformative process, you know that it is a lot of ups and downs. It's a lot of back and forth. It's going back to get stuff that you forgot. It's relapsing, doing the old stuff again, and then being like, wait, that's not working. I remember again. So we liked the Fibonacci spiral as the symbol of transformation, that you can follow this process, but there's also a lot of pitfalls. I talked about making your life your practice. And one of the pitfalls there is that you've probably met people like this who can get very precious about all of their practices. Like, excuse me, get out of my way. I need to go do my meditation right now. Or, it's just, it's okay. It's a part of the process. But if you get stuck there, that it's all about me and my practices and what I need, it limits you from growing, actually. Or we talked about the process of seeking initially, and some people get caught in seeking for the rest of their lives. They never land in a practice or a community or a process. None of them are good enough. All of them have a little flaw. So they're like, I'm never going to land in one. I'm just going to keep seeking. It's okay, but it limits you. So viewing that process. And so, in this natural history approach, once you have a model, you start to test the model. So, we started to follow people over time, like people who were just enrolling in a transformative process and checking out how did they unfold over time? Did our model really predict what was going to happen? Now we're all the way now. I'm at UC San Diego now at the Center for Human Imagination and the Center for Mindfulness and the Center for Psychedelics. These are my trifecta right now: mindfulness, imagination, and psychedelics, all of which are really looking into how do people see new possibilities? How can we shift people's perspectives so that they can see new possibilities that allow them to be kinder to themselves, others, and the planet? That's really been my mission in life. And so we're looking at it from all these angles. We're also using virtual reality where we'll put people into an experience and we try to catch the transformation like as it's happening, supporting it through the virtual reality, which allows us to put them in impossible situations that they might not be able to be on Earth. For example, we have created a virtual reality experience of astronaut Edgar Mitchell's experience in space, so people can put on the headset, they join Edgar in space, he's narrating it, and they're getting closer and closer to the Earth, and we're measuring their EEG, their heart rate variability. We give them measures before and after. And we have a number of other VR environments where we're working on this. We also study people who are going through psilocybin journeys. We look at people who are practicing mindfulness. And so all of this now is at the level of laboratory research and prospective controlled, blinded, placeboed studies.
Published in journals that are, quote, reputable. Tell me more about the role of imagination in transformation. Because even as I was describing the going through the salt fields to the sacred valley of Peru, there's imagination going on there. There's imagination about the past. There's a future type of imagination of the possibility that's ahead. And imagination is not a word that we use past like age 5,
Right.
unless we're like in the creative, realm of creative writing or something like
Like
our fantasy
Disneyland
or sex life. But beyond that, I mean, it's also good for all that. But so I actually use a ton of imagery. I do a lot of guided imagery in my work. I just believe in imagination for so many different reasons for creativity. Tell us more about its role with transformation.
Well, what's really interesting about all these people we interviewed and all of the kind of data that we got and boiled it down, we really boiled down to what we called worldview transformation, a transformation in how you view the world. And a lot of people will say, I changed the story I was telling myself and about the world. If you look at that word story, it really does make sense. Like, what story am I telling myself about the world? So if I walk down the street and I'm looking at everyone and I'm imagining, I bet everybody here is doing their best. Everybody's just trying to make their way through life. They're essentially good people, just trying to make it. And I'm kind of like all these people and they're kind of like me, they just, as the compassion practice, just like me, this is how I view the world. There may be a few people who are, bad apples, but in general, people are good. If I have that as my story, I'm going to have a very different experience, both psychologically and physiologically in life than someone who walks down the street, very same street, looking at all the same people saying, these people would cheat me if they could. They would take what I have. They will take advantage of me. They're dangerous. I need to make sure that I'm defending myself at all times. And most of them are, unintelligent, whatever, right? You're telling yourself stories about where these people are coming from and what kind of people they are. Then I'm going to walk through the world with a jacked up nervous system. I'm going to feel stress most of the time. My behavior and my psychology is going to be very, very different. Those are differences in how I imagine the world. And yes, some of them could be based on my upbringing. So if you grew up in a dangerous environment, you may have more thoughts that people are dangerous. If you grew up in a safe one, you may have more thoughts that it's safe. So it's not like it's your fault necessarily, all of what you do, but you do have a choice. Once you determine, I'm imagining a lot of life. And if any of you have sat a 10-day retreat, you know for sure that you are imagining a lot of life. Like if you're sitting in the same place for 10 days, meditating 8 hours a day, some days you're in bliss and joy, other days you're in agony about the same exact life, you know that the story you're telling yourself about things is dictating your physiology to a large extent and how you view the world. And hopefully, what you come to at some point is I can make some choices about how I choose to fill in the blanks. So I have my sensory observation, what I see, what I hear, what I smell, what I taste, what I touch. That's like, okay, that's what I do know about the world. Everything else besides those five senses, I'm literally making it up. I'm imagining, right? And you can choose how you decide to fill in the blanks. Over time, you can create habitual patterns of choosing to imagine different things about the world than your old stories told you. This is a lot of what psychotherapy is. It's changing your beliefs and how you imagine the world works, how you imagine you are perceived, how you imagine what type of person you are and what your capabilities and possibilities are. So that's one way to think about imagination.
Yeah, there's some cornerstone, they call them nuggets in psychology that have a big impact on outcome for folks. And one of them is self-efficacy.
Mm-hmm.
And that has to do with imagination. It has to do with, do you believe that you will have the self-efficacy to get through this, right? There's stuff with imagination too that you are helping people see their own experience from that sort of decentered
Mm,
approach, where it's like, I'm not the center of anything. I'm actually noticing how my mind is making a story. And then I get to be the chooser of that story, and then see how, when I choose, is it something that I'm dreading? Is it something that I'm dreading and that I'm scared about? And then the more that I dread it, the more my nervous system gets anxious. And then the more my nervous system is anxious, the more I'm going to focus on certain aspects of it that I don't like, right? Or am I going to shift it to the possibility of what lies ahead, and the interesting people, and the being curious? That we do have choice around how flexible our attention is. We have choice around the stories that we want to turn up the volume of. But some of the stories that are implanted in our brains
yeah.
have been
Until we
implanted from our
sure.
childhood, or
Yeah.
even from media and things like that, that we're just like consuming stories all the time that we don't even know that we're consuming, or we're overhearing conversations and we're just picking up on it, and it's
Mm,
feeding
mm,
certain stories in our mind that we don't know that are being fed. I remember when I was at Plum Village at the monastery, and one of the monastics there, they talk about seeds and the manas of the mind, and
mm.
seeds that can get activated and watered. And once they're activated, they're always activated. They're always there. It's just whether or not you're watering them and being careful. They call it nutriments. The nutriments, be careful about what nutriments you take in
Yeah.
terms of watering those seeds. Just like you talked about tools and practices around transformation, there's tools and practices for cultivating our imagination, right?
The very first thing is just to begin to redefine imagination in your own taxonomy, to say imagination is not just when I picture a flying dragon. Imagination is the stories I tell myself, the ways I embellish my world, the ways I embroider reality. Um, it can be visualization. Like there's some very, very good data showing that if you are lifting weights, let's say, or if you're trying to rehab a muscle, people did it with their hands when they had a injury and they were rehabbing their muscles. When they just did the exercise, they improved. But if they did the exercise and they imagined their muscles strengthening, they got 30% more strength. And this is shown now throughout the body. We know that mental rehearsal, when you imagine, let's say you're going to go bowling and you imagine bowling a strike over and over and over again, people do actually bowl more strikes. And it's not like The Secret, I'm not saying that, oh, if you imagine a BMW enough, you're going to get a BMW. But we're not talking magic. We're just talking about giving your brain the information it needs to train itself for movement in the actual world, that you're imagining it. And your brain doesn't really differentiate as much as you might think between real action and imagined action. So, great studies showing that half of a team practices basketball on the court, the other half practices it in their imagination. They both have similar improvements in their performance. And so, very powerful what you imagine, even when you're ruminating, imagining the worst, imagining things that could happen. Again, your brain is sort of like, okay, I'm going to process that as though it's happening. And also, great data showing that when people imagine into the future, they are more likely to engage in behaviors that will create the future that they imagined. And so, imagining a healthy, happy future, again, not magically, it doesn't mean that everything you imagine will happen. It means that you're imagining how you might navigate situations that come up in the future. Like Billie Jean King was a tennis great, like one of the goats of tennis. She said she would go to sleep imagining the ball coming at every single angle and exactly what angle she would hold her racket to the ball. And she said that was really what she attributed a lot of her success to, in addition to real practice. So that's
Yeah.
one thing.
When I practice with clients on imagination, like that kind of thing, like you're going to go into your board meeting, I actually have them practice with things going wrong and then
Yes,
imagining themselves responding skillfully, as opposed to the imagining everything going right, because that
exactly.
doesn't prepare you. You want to prepare your brain for the flexibility of response. And that's what we want to, practice. Like imagine that they are staring at you.
Right.
and you
Yeah.
did say
Imagine if
something
you messed up.
stupid.
Exactly.
Now, what are you going to do? And then
Yeah.
imagine yourself regrouping and reorienting and grounding your feet on the ground and remembering why you're here. And, so that's a really helpful skill. I actually had it, my girlfriend, I have this little group chat I'm on with these women that I've been connecting with for years. And one of them sent an image of her roadmap for the year. It was a drawing of the year. And in it, she had sectioned out 12 months. And it was like a road, like a twisty road.
I love
And
that.
each month had like pictures and images that she hand drew of what she's envisioning for herself
Mm,
month by month through the year. Like one of them had an airplane on it because I imagine she's traveling somewhere that month, and had people in it in a garden. And it was just this beautiful depiction of her imagination of what she hopes for herself, and sort of like vision boarding, I guess, but
yeah.
but it had that timeline to it that
Mm,
could be a guide for her. And it's not that it has to stick to that, but it's so mind opening imagination.
I love
Yeah.
that. Yeah. And you can have embodied imagination. So help people imagine how they feel, how their bodies even feel, how their bodies are moving in the situation. What did they smell? What did they taste? What did they hear? And so making imagination not just visual, but embodied can be a real boost to the power of imagination. It's also really important to know that not all transformations, how do I put this? Well, put it this way. One of my positive transformations as a teenager was through science fiction. And so even though I was going through a really hard time and I was like, I don't really know what anything means and there must be something more than this, I would sit down with my dad and watch Star Trek, or I would go watch ET or Close Encounters of the Third Kind, or, all of these Star Wars, and reading Robert Heinlein and Stranger in a Strange Land. And these stories, A Wrinkle in Time, you know, these stories conveyed something to me as a teenager about the vast potential, the vast possibilities, um, how we could deal with evil, how we could deal with injustice, how we could deal with death, how we could deal with separation from a parent. Is there magic? Could there be magic? How does it intersect with science? So many, how do we deal with racism? So many different things that I could relate to in science fiction that nobody in my world, like I couldn't figure out how to talk to anybody about it. So there's a phrase that says some truths can only be found in fiction. And that's why I think it's very important for us to allow ourselves to imagine even the fantastical, even things that are, how many of you read The Chronicles of Narnia or Lord of the Rings, or, all of these things, these mythologies that have give us truths that we don't have to experience in person, and they don't even have to be possible, but they tell us something real about how we can understand and interact with reality. There's a great scene in Harry Potter, if you guys remember this, where Harry Potter's in sort of a heavenly kind of realm and he sees Dumbledore there and he says, "Professor, is this all in my mind or is it real?" And he says, "Well, of course it's in your mind. Why do you think that doesn't mean it's real?" And so I know it sounds a little weird, but if you can let yourself imagine into fantasy, fiction, symbolism, and bring truths back from that, because there's a realm of our being that understands logic and reason and data. And there's a realm of our being that could care less about logic, reason, and data, and cares about emotion, symbol, and story. And I am telling you that the second realm that I'm describing is much more involved in behavior change and health and well-being than the first realm. I mean, I would almost say 10% of behavior change is based on information. It's very important to have data and information. But if you encounter a story or a symbol or a archetype, just like your trip to Peru, that is really what causes fundamental shifts in people's worldviews.
Absolutely. If you find your animal spirit and then you get to see your animal spirit on a regular basis out in
Right?
nature, and then
Yeah.
you're like, that's my animal spirit. I just remembered they're here to teach me. My animal spirit is deer, because Diana's the goddess of the hunt.
Mm,
She's
mm,
also the goddess of the moon, but my parents named me after the hunt. I was like,
mm,
thanks. So, but whenever I see a deer, and especially if I see a family of deer, which there's a lot of around here,
mm,
I
mm,
remember, oh, I see as a huntress, like it's to be brave, it's to go out into the wilderness in the
mm.
feminine realm and the mothering and all of that. And these symbols, I mean, this is also why Buddhism is true, and also why indigenous cultures had it right. Symbols have been, I mean, if you think back to our first form of writing, it was through
Yeah.
symbols. It was communicating through symbols. How we use our hand, and the symbology in our hands, to describe things that actually our gestures communicate before our language does, right? That symbols are so powerful, and those are in the realm of imagination.
Every religion and spiritual tradition is is some group's attempt to explain the truth of the ineffable through
Mm-hmm.
symbols, through archetypes, through stories, through gods and goddesses and sacred texts and symbols. And they're all, to me, they're all so beautiful. I know that
Yeah.
I believe that each one of them holds a portion of the truth. Um, but this symbolic world, we're not often taught how to navigate it. And so at the same time, imagination is a skill. And I have a forthcoming book on imagination that'll come out in August that you can pre-order on Amazon. I'll give myself a little plug. It's called Imagine That: Unlocking the Science of Imagination to Transform the Way You Think, Feel, and Live. Tons of practices in there at the skill-based level that are scientifically based. But I also see imagination as a territory of being. It's a place that you go inside of your experience, but it's a place that you go that speaks a different language, and there are different rules, different laws of nature, actually. And when you spend more time in it, you can bring back jewels, you can bring back treasures, bring back gems that you can't really get anywhere else. And so I'm going to be encouraging people to imagine big in the coming few years of my career. And I think when we look at the major problems humanity faces, climate change, the polycrisis, war, all of the things that have vexed us for so long, and especially now with the insanity that's happening, at least in the United States and in many other parts of the world, people that I agree with often make a tremendous error of spouting data 24/7 and explaining why things are wrong and how bad it is and why it's incorrect, and persecuting the incorrectness of it all. We must speak the truth. Yes, we must speak truth to power, maybe with, again, 10% of our effort, but we should be spending 90% of our effort capturing the imagination of the people towards a new alternative vision that is not based on hate, that's not based on exclusion, it's not based on a police state, it's not based on racism and bigotry. If we can't begin to capture people's imaginations about what is possible in the future, in opposition to how it's going right now, we will never succeed. Martin Luther King Jr. did not get up and say, "We have a problem." He said, "I have a dream." And we need to begin to dream again. We have to be able to dream again. We have to use the science of imagination and the practice of imagination to come up with completely new possibilities, ones that are not just incremental derivatives of how we've done it in the past, but are blasting through into a completely new landscape.
And that's where I also think collective imagination is really interesting. Compiling our different imaginative stories and using things like artificial intelligence to put them together to create something even bigger than each of our individual imaginations. As a psychologist, we know that, like, when you're trying to convince someone to change their view, they become more certain in their view.
Yeah.
And when it becomes a we, going back to that noetic experience, you said towards the end of the noetic spiral, Fibonacci spiral, is this moving from I to we. When it becomes a we, then we're all collaborating on this future that we want to be part of. And it does have to be big and bigger than we could imagine, that we could think was possible. Initially, I was fearful of AI, also fearful of VR, even though I worked in a VR lab looking at VR for social anxiety, one of the early interventions. And when you are afraid of something and you limit the possibility of it, then you will just live a more narrow perspective in life. So
Yeah.
imagination opens all of that up, even having the possibility that these interventions that people are very afraid of, things like VR or AI, imagine them being used for the benefit of humankind. What could be possible? What
Mm.
kind of world we could live in that could be so much better than the one we're in?
At UC San Diego, where I spend a third of my time, the Arthur C. Clarke Center for Human Imagination. Arthur C. Clarke was a science fiction novelist who wrote 50 science fiction novels, including 2001: A Space Odyssey. And several of those actually ended up in inventions that ended up being true. Like the Clarke geostationary orbit was imagined in a science fiction novel and is what has led to satellites and all of us having cell phones, right? So he had a quote that said, "The only way to find the limits of the possible is to venture beyond them into the impossible, a little way beyond them into the impossible." And so I love that quote.
So as we close up, and we're all going to get your book, imagine that. We're going to pre-order your book, imagine that. I hope to have you back on when it comes out in August this summer. But as we close, I'm wondering, what are you imagining right now? What's on your mind? What's the impossible that you are venturing into?
Hmm. Yeah, there's a couple things that are really exciting me. One is I just hosted, along with Bruce Damer at the Center for Minds and John Dean and Manesh Gurn, a workshop, a symposium on psychedelics and how altered states of consciousness can lead us towards creative insights and novel breakthroughs. So that's really exciting that some work is happening in that domain, that psychedelics are being used for multiple clinical outcomes and as they should be: pain, depression, anxiety, addiction. But there's also an opportunity to study psychedelics and other altered states of consciousness in how they might be able to create the internal conditions to go beyond our limitations in the way we view ourselves and the world, both in our personal lives and in major societal breakthroughs. And then the other side of it is just, working on a world in medicine, in business, in education, where we kind of do a major leap into whole person approaches that honor the logical, reasonable, scientific side of us and train us very rigorously in that aspect of our being, but also train us very rigorously in our capacities for imagination, for connection, for empathy, compassion, mindfulness. And so equal opportunity to explore the inner world and the outer world and to bring those two together to, drastically increase human flourishing.
Beautiful. Thank you, Cassie. Cassandra
Thank you for
Vieten.
having
Go check
me,
out her
Diana.
book, Imagine That. I'm only
Thank you so
imagine big
much.
possibility for you. Honor,
Thank you for
delight.
the work you do, Diana. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Wise Effort Podcast. Wise Effort is about you taking your energy and putting it in the places that matter most to you. And when you do so, you'll get to savor the good of your life along the way. If you would like to become a member of the Wise Effort Podcast, go to wiseeffort.com. And if you like this episode and think it would be helpful to somebody, please leave a review over at Podchaser. I would like to thank my team, my partner in all things, including the producer of this podcast, Craig, Ashley Hyatt, the podcast manager, and thank you to Ben Gold at Bell and Branch for our music. This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only, and it's not meant to be a substitute for mental health treatments.